So through desk research and industry interviews, we were able to organize sustainability improvements for apparel into these 8 key strategies. As you can see here, we have reduced chemical impact, improving water management, improving energy management, investing in raw materials, investing in sustainable raw material sourcing, investing in circularity innovation, investing in supplier and employee well-being, and then finally investing in sustainable business marketing and communication. So we found from our research that everything sort of was able to bucket into these key areas. We then took those strategies and we wanted to expand them into specific methods for which we could implement. So we were able to form these practices and then on into sub-practices that really allow us to execute those practices underneath those strategies. Following that, we took a value chain approach and mapped out the sub-practices within the strategies to the corresponding areas within the value chain. This allowed us to determine where the responsibility lies and the areas most impacted by the implementation of these practices, as well as the interdependencies. So a key challenge in the implementation of the sustainability initiatives is understanding the drivers. With the complexity of the apparel system, which we know is complex, the value chain is vital to really determine the stakeholders for each practice, as in some cases there are many stakeholders and partnerships that are needed. So this is an illustration then of the framework layout. As you can see, the sub-practice in white corresponds to the practice and the relevant components of the apparel value chain. So not every sub-practice is going to impact all of the parts of the value chain. So we again wanted to make sure it was most material, so you knew who the key stakeholders were to engage. Now, with that, I'll walk you through 2 examples of the application of ROSI in apparel. In the first example, I'll share a case study using the framework and ROSI methodology that includes a built monetization tool. And then in the second, we'll explore how we think through the benefits and monetization methods and see how we can incorporate new strategies and as the industry continues to evolve. Okay, so with that, this is Reformation. It's an example of a company that had already implemented a sustainability strategy around circularity and innovation. As you can see here, and we'll walk through exactly how we got here, but from here, when we were able to go through the monetization tool, we found that there was profit from the partnership program with thredUP, plus the incremental profit from a new customer base, the customer acquisition cost reduction, and then increase in earned media, which totaled net benefit of 1.9 million at the time. So how do we get there? Well, this is our strategy for circularity and innovation. As you can see again on the left column are the practices. So we focused here on investing in circular product take-back programs. And then in green, in bright green, you see we have the sub-practice of implement product take-back programs for resale and encourage resale participation, because in order to leverage this practice, we needed to engage consumers. And so as you can see here, it rolls up into the value chain areas of distribution, retail, and consumer engagement. So then from there, we use the 5-step ROSI process, and we are able to define what those mediating factors are, which we'll go through in the next slide, and then be able to craft the proposed benefits that are gained from implementing the sub-practice. And we'll continue further into understanding then how we get proposed monetization methods to determine the profit gained from initiating the sustainability practice. So with that, as you can see in the previous slide, we have the relevant mediating factors were innovation, customer loyalty, sales and marketing, and meeting coverage. And what we tried to do is give each practice sort of a series of mediating factors that seemed relevant, and understanding that those then benefits would quantify from that. So for innovation, for example, it's create new revenue streams using a sustainable business model, which is exactly what we're going to go through. So as we continued through and we worked with Reformation, we were able to create and determined that by leveraging this new model, they were able to garner new purchase sales, which are sales generated by the parent company from customer participation in resale. Then there were lower customer acquisition costs, and then there's unpaid earned media. So these were the three main ones, and we're going to then now go through, and you'll see this is then we create tools, template tools, to be able to actually calculate the profits. So this is just a snapshot, but then I'll go through one to give specifics. So this, for example, is the new purchase sales template monetization model. I want to point out that in the top section, a key, what was really needed was getting data, and we really needed to understand the data behind the number of customers that were to partake in the resale program, the average spending, the number of transactions, and then we gave a growth rate assumption. And so we're able to calculate that. And then in turn, on the bottom, we use those inputs to drive revenues. But then of course there are costs. So we still had to determine if there was a gift card given, we had to deduct that cost, for example. So this is, again, a tool that we create to enable the monetization and for companies so you can continually update and utilize data to determine what those sustainability initiatives would drive. So now I'm going to quickly walk you through an industry example of how we actually break down into determining the benefits and corresponding monetizations. So this is an example. As you can see here, this is the investing in circularity and innovation strategy. From there, we decided to focus on invest in circular design and innovative use of materials and processes as a practice. And then we decided a sub-practice of that would be use digital samples instead of physical samples. Again, here's another snapshot of the framework for the strategy. Again, you can see how it rolls up into product development, procurement, and manufacturing. I do want to say here that we are trying, when we go through it, we tried not to focus on the materials because that's a very complicated aspect of it. But for the purpose of this exercise, we'll focus on these two value chain areas, but there obviously is more impact in other areas as well. So from here, we took the background on this practice. So products must meet agreed upon requirements in order to proceed into production throughout the sample process. Brands are typically, we're trying to change that, right? Provided physical samples of products for manufacturers through this approval process. So in being able to determine that as the background, we would then go into the analysis of the benefits. And by implementing the shifts with the corresponding value chain areas, we identified the following: that there would be a reduction of product development costs because you're no longer producing those samples. There's a reduction in transportation costs because you're no longer shipping the samples back and forth. And then there's a reduction in disposable waste costs. So the challenge is then to determine the savings and costs incurred from the implementation. But we're going to walk you through how we sort of get there in the next slide, so we can hopefully make that a little bit easier to digest. So we'll start with the first example of reduced product development costs. So again, this is cost incurred from the sampling process that is typically done in a sample room versus a production capacity. So the cost savings would be through the monetization message would be product development costs before digital sample implementation minus product development costs after digital sample implementation. And although this seems probably easy, again, there are a number of associated costs through sample operations. You also have to account for the upfront technology investment. And then oftentimes it's understanding the industry and knowing that these costs most likely will be passed through savings through your FOB. So in understanding the role in which finance plays within development of samples, you most likely will see this in your margins per se as you continue. So then we are just going to quickly go through a couple more. Reduce transportation costs and associated costs as an example of a benefit. So this could be packaging of samples and less physical samples to ship, corresponding to reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot, right, that's involved in actually having to transport samples. And again, cost savings would be transportation and GH related costs before digital sample implementation, as well as minus the cost after. And something to think about, because this is partially risk management, that's part of the ROSI methodology, is understanding that GHG related costs can include regulatory and fines and taxes. So there is a lot to obviously take into account when thinking through these benefits and monetizations. And then the last just quick example is just reduced disposable waste associated costs. So again, before, the cost savings would be before implementation minus after, but these could be, unused fabric scraps. So obviously it's a very complex system, and you have to think through of what goes into creating samples, and what could you eliminate by shifting to a digital sample versus physical. So with that, I will pass it back to Chisara to go over some additional case studies, not just apparel, but other industries as well.
Sure. Thank you, Hannah. We just have 3 or so that we're going to go over here, and then we will be able to open up. So another example, and this is something that could be applicable, obviously, outside of apparel, is some work that we did with REI with their sustainability program, where we found that sustainability programs can actually deliver human resource results within a company. And so what we saw looking at the employee sustainability program and the benefits, fits, and cost for 2019 is that there was reduced turnover and hiring costs. There was increased productivity amongst the high-performing employees. And then there were mission-aligned investments, including accounting for paid time off. I think they were extending paid time off days to their employees. But ultimately, this is information that they were able to first understand through having an employee survey, to understand the effects of their employee sustainability programs. And then we were able to use that information to account for the benefit, which was a total net benefit of about $34 million. Another example that we have is within a pharmaceutical company, where a global pharmaceutical company converted to a green chemistry formulation for a product where they were about to lose a patent. And what they found through that conversion is that they were able to reduce energy and water and carbon emissions by up to 80%. And then they also reduced their manufacturing costs. So making that change to green chemistry formulation obviously had benefits for the carbon side, but then there were also additional benefits that they were able to account for. And I think one last example that we have is around utilities, where we have a Canadian electricity generator that had annual revenues of about $1 billion Canadian dollars annually, evaluated their business case for doing an early exit from coal into renewable energy. And we used the ROSI framework, and were able to find that there were associated benefits that were, they had to look outside of the box to be able to figure out what those were. So there was employee retention improvement due to lower turnover, based on the employees being happier working for a company that had these sustainability commitments. There was increased labor productivity, and then also ultimately a lower cost of capital for the company as well, based on that decision to make that early exit. And so the next slide. Here's another one. We can skip over this one. It's another example of employee retention. And we really just showed this because we wanted to be able to show that there are benefits that sometimes may exist where you least expect. And so before we go over to questions and answers, just want to talk a little bit about how the ROSI application can evolve. And so really the ROSI application is meant to evolve over time as companies either develop additional criteria for prioritizing sustainability investments within their companies, as they enhance their process and are able to improve data collection. So getting a better understanding of where some of that value may exist, and either changing the way that they're collecting data or starting to collect the data that will help in monetization. And then also just thinking differently and identifying benefits that will help them to refine the monetization approaches that they may develop. So we don't see this as being kind of something that a company should do once. And in fact, when we work with companies to do this, we encourage them to take the data, take the frameworks and Excel files that we create and use them, change them, and populate them with information as that information becomes available. And so as such, the monetization methodology, that's okay. The monetization methodology can be adapted to meet different scopes and specifications. And then also it really will allow for a full accounting of all of the value streams where you're able to bring the right people within the organization around the table to define what some of those benefits are. So I think with that, I think that was our last slide. Now we have just some resources that are available on our website. And so, as I said in the beginning, we really want to get this information in the hands of companies, organizations. We want them to use it. We welcome feedback as well. And whenever we work with a research partner, it's always ultimately to be able to feed into this kind of the resources that we have that we put out for public consumption. And so you'll be able to find on our website their apparel framework strategies, their case narratives with our apparel partners. And then we also have the Excel monetization tools that you can download and go in and add in data. And for example, even if you're not in apparel, you can definitely take a look at some of the employee-facing tools that you would be able to use, even if you're not in apparel. And then we also have a number of examples of some of the thought leadership papers that have been authored by CSB that relate to the topics of not just ROSI, but then also financial investing, bringing ESG information into your quarterly earnings calls, and other information related to sustainability. Great. And here's our contact information. I know we put a lot of information, kind of threw a lot of information at you, but really now would love to hear any questions that you may have, any reflections. If there's anyone on the call that is either using ROSI or some form of a way to look at the investments that they're making in sustainability that you would like to share, this would be the time to do that.